Hey everyone, welcome back to the Small Town Nerdcast. I'm your host, Brian, and today we have an awesome interview for you with writer and artist Monty Nero and his book, Death Sentence Liberty. Unfortunately, the Kickstarter is over now, but fortunately, it was successful, very successful. So really cool stuff. He's a fun guy to talk to. And unfortunately, I do not give him an intro when we start recording. We just start having a conversation. And I completely forgot about it. So here we are with this little bit of audio. But Monty was a lot of fun to have. And unfortunately, near the end, I think the mic starts getting a little weird on his end. I don't know if it was what kind of mic he was using. Like, because during the recording we were having a great time and I could hear everything, but on playback I noticed some issues. So just kind of keep that in mind. But it's a great interview. We have a lot of fun, talk about some things. I don't want to spoil what we talk about now, but it's definitely worth a listen. So without further ado, here is comic book writer and artist, award-winning comic book writer and artist Monty Nero. Yeah, man. Well, how you been?
Yeah, busy, very busy, but good. It's all good. You know, it's better to be busy than not busy, isn't it?
All right, I would love to be a lot busier.
What are you doing these days?
Oh man, just trying to get by. It seems like,
Yeah,
I have a job that I work, and then I try to do this on the side to,
yeah,
my passion, trying to get the
yeah,
passion going.
yeah. Whereabouts do you live?
So we live in Texas.
Cool.
Yeah, so probably about an hour outside of Houston is where I live, Houston, Texas. So
Oh, okay. I've been
it's
trying to find
hot.
a, I've been trying to find a good comic printer in Texas for ages, but there don't seem to be any.
Oh, and what were you looking for again?
Someone to print my comics in Texas.
Oh gosh, yeah. It's so hard to find anyone. Um,
That surprises me because America's a very entrepreneurial country. You'd think there'd be people queuing up to print comics in Texas.
oh man, you think people would be going left and right to kind of do this kind of stuff, but for whatever reason, man, it's like I don't know, man. Maybe it's because there's a lot of backwards thinking people here. Who knows?
Well, it's good of you to fly the flag in Texas.
um, Man, I don't know. It's harder, especially in my area, because you fly any kind of flags that ain't what other people agree with. You gotta be careful.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's tough being a nerd in a small town, man, and liking geeky things in the small town. But
Really?
yeah, but you find like your niche, you find kinship with other people, and
Yeah,
so I feel like those bonds are stronger.
yeah, yeah. That's great. And the podcast obviously helps with that a lot. So that's cool.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. I always worry though, you have those people that come out in conversations like, "Oh, well, I have a podcast."
yeah,
I'm always scared to sound like one of those kind of people when I'm almost terrified to bring it up in conversations.
yeah. I know what you mean. But you're doing good work. You should be proud. Um,
Right.
Quite different to Scotland. Obviously, Scotland's quite remote, and traditionally, outside of the major cities, it's like quite backwards, really, in lots of ways. Lots of farming, and it's just a very empty country, with a lot of very difficult to get about, very hilly. So you'd think it would be similar to what the situation you're describing, but I think in the last 20 years, there's just been a huge shift. And now it's just like totally normal to be a nerd and to be into comics and all that sort of stuff. And most people that you see, even in like remote villages or towns, they're sort of like, clearly dressed and, into this kind of culture. And then when you have these comic cons in like really quite small towns in Scotland, they're just absolutely mobbed with comic fans. all just like come from, all the neighbouring sort of villages and towns. It's a really
Yeah.
good scene, and they're all very accepting of each other.
That sounds fantastic, man.
Yeah, but that's really changed over the last 20 years. So you might see something similar happening there, maybe.
Right. And I would love for something like that. I think ultimately that's kind of one of my goals for my small town is to try to get something because I know there are people here. I know there are kids here and I mean, I always say we live in a small town, but our population is still over 10,000.
Yeah,
So I know there are others like me.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's just my town has never had that push for something like a comic book convention.
No,
And actually just recently a town next to ours hosted their own and I got a chance to go, got a chance to be a part of it and see how they do things. And I was trying to get some people from my town and to get involved, like people who plan events and stuff, so that they could see this. Because I think it's like you said, even in smaller towns, it's more common to find someone who's also. I mean, you have stuff like Marvel movies, DC movies, comic books that people can get now easier because they're online and just they're hitting everyday mainstream. Netflix is putting out every kind of show
yeah,
even from like smaller publishers. So I think it's more widely known and more common. So I would love to be able to bring something like a Comic Con, no matter how small,
yeah,
to this town because I think it would be fantastic, man.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
What's the
But
name of your
anyway,
town? What's the
what's
name of your
up?
town? What's the name of your town?
Oh, so we're called Bay City.
Basically.
Yeah. So, and like I said, we're about an hour outside of Houston. So, honestly, Houston puts on great conventions. And so, whenever I get the chance, I always make my way there. I think it has probably the largest comic book convention in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's always a fantastic time.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. But enough about me, man. Let's talk about Mr. Monty, man.
Mhm.
For I mean, one, we've been trying to get to each other. It feels like this is 2 months in the making now.
Yeah.
A successful Kickstarter has come and gone since we've been talking, and so I'm sorry I couldn't get to you before, but congratulations on getting your Kickstarter funded, man.
Yeah, thanks. No, there's no worries. I mean, there'll be another one along in a few weeks. So
Oh, well, see, there you go. Now we
I've
can
always,
start like
I've always,
pre-promoting.
yeah, I'm always making something. So yeah, if anyone's interested in that, just drop me a line or on that social media, message me or look at the backer kit. There's always a backer kit shop where you can buy my stuff.
Nice. And so for this recent Kickstarters for your book, Death Sentence Liberty, which is the third story in a set of three, or is
Yeah, the third
how?
book. So each book is about 160 pages, and this is the third story. And they're all you can read them all individually, but they also tell an ongoing story across the three books. So yeah, they're all interlinked.
It's really cool, man. And from what I could gather quickly on this, when I was reading through everything, so it's these people that are getting superpowers, but at a pretty interesting cost. Is it? Can you kind of explore more into like what the book's about? Or
Yeah,
like,
so
yeah,
so it's like about an artist, a musician, and a sort of movie star, and they all contract this virus that gives them these extraordinarily weird abilities, but they've only got 6 months to live from when they contract the virus. So they've only got 6 months to fulfill themselves and figure out what they want to do with their lives, which is obviously quite an intense situation. And it's very action packed. obviously with their strange powers, they become sort of very desirable, and a lot of people want to capture them, and so on and so forth. Um, but what it really does, underlying all that, and what makes it kind of emotional and relatable, is we're kind of all in a situation where we've only got a certain amount of time with which to do whatever we want to do in our life. And it might be creative, it might be personal, it might be family, it might be, some great impossible goal that you want to achieve at some point in your life. It might be a small thing that you want to do. And we have the span of our lives to sort of try and do that, or figure out how to do that. And what this does is it kind of condenses it all into a really intense sort of 6 month period that's kind of very passionate. It makes it very dramatic because they're all running out of time. So yeah, it's got a lot to it, and I think it's where it's always reviewed really, really well. So I think that's why, because there's just a lot of there's a lot of action in it, but there's also a lot of emotional kind of resonance and truth to it.
Definitely, man. And I will say, for me, I'm in my mid 30s now, or coming into my mid 30s. Nothing hits more to close, like nothing hits closer to home than feeling like time is running out now. um,
Yeah,
you start to when I have a son now, and he's getting older and just moving
yeah,
up through school, and at some point you kind of think to yourself, like, you start to think about what you've done in your past, like, oh, I used to be like this in high school, or I used to
yeah,
do this kind of stuff. Where
yeah,
did that go? Why am I wasting what talents I used to have? And
yeah.
maybe that's like why this I'm just shouting out into the void with this podcast, is like I'm trying not to let it all die.
Yeah. I think that's very true, and I think everyone feels like that on some level. And I came up with the idea and manically. It's one thing having the idea, isn't it? But then what drives you to actually make the comic? So what the situation I was in was that my wife, we got pregnant and been trying to have a child for a while, so we were really excited. Um, but then suddenly it felt like, oh, I've only got like 9 months or 7 months, this takes a while to find out. To do whatever I'm going to do, creatively or comic wise, which isn't, if you're doing a comic, an independent comic, that's not a business proposition. That's just you're likely to lose money doing that. But I really just had this burning desire to make this comic and to do a comic and to do my own comic, to do something that was sort of just very much my thing, that was my personality and stuff. And I thought, like, well, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it, because in my mind, once I became a dad, I'd have to be very responsible and earn money and get a normal job and all
All
that kind of
that
stuff.
boring crap that comes with fatherhood.
Yeah, that side of it. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I was like massively excited and proud, and just it's all I wanted. I'd wanted to be a dad for, as long as I can remember. I was really happy about it. But
Oh, right,
there
man.
was also this other pressure. I just thought, like, well, if I don't do a comic now, I'm never going to do it. So I literally just really set about it in a determined way, and it's kind of like a microcosm of the characters in the story, because my dream was to make a comic, and I had like 6 months to make a comic before it felt to me like that would be like my time would be up as far as that kind of thing. Um, and of course, what turned out was the comic was really successful, and it made quite a lot of money, and it's about as successful as an independent comic could be at that time. So ended up getting picked up by a major publisher and published around the world, and it got picked up by a French publisher and published around, the French-speaking world, and it became this thing. And I realized that I didn't actually have to stop doing this. I could keep on making comics and still support my family. And I was just like, oh, this is like brilliant. It couldn't have worked out any better. And it was like the last thing I was expecting when I made the comic. I was just expecting to make a comic, lose money, and to at least have said, like, here is my comic. This is like how I would do a comic if I had a chance, and have purely representative of my sort of take on comic. So yeah, and I think all that passion and fear and emotion kind of transmuted itself into the characters in the comic, and they feel very they feel very similarly about their thing, whether it's to be an artist or to be a musician or to be a sort of movie star or a comedian.
Hmm. And I mean, you said it, and I felt the same way when my wife was pregnant. Like nothing is quite as scary as nature's natural timers, man. And
Yeah,
but it's so awesome to hear. Being able to hear you go to like a passion project or just like something that you've wanted to do, and it works out. And it goes so well. But I think a lot of people write close to home, and it seems like these characters are very similar or have ties to you personally and your personality. Um, and I love that it has to deal with artists and stuff like that. A lot of stories, and especially when it comes to like super heroics and things like that. They're people maybe not from an artistic background all the time. They got something else going on with them, or I
yeah.
don't know.
I think for me, it's one of the problems with superhero comics. One of the things I don't like about them. I love superhero comics, but one of the things I don't like about them is the characters are often set of powers with a sort of very basic personality. They don't actually have kind of what I call the real life or real passions or family or the sort of crushes that most of us could relate to, which are all to do mainly with work and family and trying to get by in the wider world in the face of crazy stuff that might happen, like an obsession, COVID, whatever it might be. So they become a lot of superheroes just become these kind of ciphers, and they're entertaining, but they're basically just powers with a bit of a personality sort of on top. And when I've written sort of like the X Men or the Hulk or something, I've always tried to make them kind of rounded, real people in the real world that had a sort of real kind of situation going on, and also, delivery the awesome stuff that we love about the Hulk and we love about the X Men, Wolverine or whatever. He's got to get the claws out. It's got to be some snip moments. It's got to be, some some sort of Clint Eastwood type situation where he sort of like squares up to somebody. You've got to have all these elements, but you've got to bring it alive in some way. And
Right.
I find the best way to do that is just to think like, well, how do I make these real people, and how, if they were a real person that I knew, like in my sleep, and they had these incredible, excellent powers, and
Yeah.
what would that actually be like? And you can sort of make it a lot more relatable. Um, One of my favourite stories that I wrote for Marvel was a little story. It's the shortest one I did for them actually. It's called "Why I Love the X Men," and it's at the back of X Men Gold Annual. I think it's the back of the X Men Gold Annual, and yeah, it just sort of tries to express what I love about the X Men and Storm in particular, and through the eyes of this sort of like young girl who kind of is in awe of her and is trying to like meet her as she goes as Storm goes about the city doing what a day in the life of these superheroes is like. They're just battling these huge monsters and buildings are getting destroyed and there's this incredibly action packed storyline going on. But at the same time, it's all just about how this young kind of girl feels about wanting to meet Storm and trying to catch up with her in all these kind of crazy situations. Um, and again, it's got like a really nice emotional pull to it at the centre. And I think if you don't make these characters relatable in that way, then they don't really work for me. It's just like a very glib action story that you can sort of take or leave. And I think that's the
Mm.
same with the films as well. Like the films work where we can really relate to the characters as people and get into sort of kind of personal space. just become just a miasma of special effects, and it gets a bit samey. It gets a bit samey and a bit boring.
Just becomes CGI monsters on the screen, man.
Yeah, they all follow the same formula. A massive object falls out of the sky and crashes at the end, or there's some
Right.
sort of big CGI battle between two characters at the end. And it's got to have that emotional through line that makes you actually care about the characters at that point. Otherwise, it's just a lot of expensive stuff to get.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned it already. I was going to bring it up, but man, getting to write for Marvel, and I think I read you wrote some DC stories, and like getting to do stuff like that, and especially the X-Men. I think like yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. They're so it's so much more than just super heroics when it comes to the X-Men. It's
Yeah,
so
about their
emotional.
relationships, and yeah,
Yeah.
they're almost like family. Like we've known these characters so long and seen them sort of grow and change in different kind of situations throughout the year. And
Yeah.
yeah, they're like a family to us. They're like a distant family. You probably feel more affectionately for Beast than you do for like one of your uncles. You know, because
Right.
you probably see Beast more, and he's kind of like more genial and affable. But
Yeah.
maybe that's just my uncle.
No, man.
Yeah, they're kind of like distant family to you, and they're kind of like family to each other. I think finding those emotional connections between the characters and how their friendship works and what they mean to each other and what it means to actually be a person who deals with those kind of powers in that kind of situation in a real world setting. Or I don't mean I'm not into like I don't try and make things realistic, like too just realistic. That's equally dull, but it's just having enough emotional truth to it that we can relate to these incredible situations, and that when we have these incredible battles, we actually feel for the characters and really care about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the key.
Now, how is that though? When versus tackling your own book versus coming to something like a Marvel book, like,
Yeah.
do you have a different mindset? Or is there something else that maybe do you look for inspiration in other ways, or do you try to maybe not make it so close to your own material that you put out?
Well, I think it depends on what you're allowed to do. So, what I found was when I was doing these kind of like annual stories and things, because they weren't like big kind of narratives that would dominate, the sort of book. They were quite happy for me to do my own thing, and I really enjoyed that because then the more they let me do my own thing, the better the stories got, and the more the X-Men readers kind of liked them. So I think that's the way to do it. And I think if I did, it wasn't. It was very fortuitous that I got to do that. And I understand how lucky I am and was to have been asked to write the X-Men or to write that book. So I don't take it lightly at all. But at the same time, I don't. The whole reason why, like, it comes back to that thing I said at the beginning, that the whole reason why I wanted to do a comic was to sort of express kind of my take on it. And I feel the same way about if I'm going to write an X-Men sort of narrative or a Batman narrative or whatever it might be. I only want to do it if I can sort of do my take on it.
Right.
And if I can't have the independence and the freedom to do that, then I'd rather not do it. I don't. If it's just a matter of earning money by writing something, then there's other ways I can earn money that are probably more satisfying for me. So I want to do it in a way that kind of like is just kind of unique to me and true to my vision for how comics should be done and how that character should be done. So
Right.
I think in order to do that, I think you've got to have quite a bit of kind of pull and sway, and you've got to be able to basically say no to the editors. So the situation when you're pitching stuff to those kind of companies is they're very much like, well, we've got like literally thousands of people that would love to write this story. So why should we go along with what you want to do? So you do what we want to do, and then you say thanks for letting you do that. So, and that's perfectly fair enough, because that's the genuine situation they're in. So that's fine. Um, but I don't I don't want to. I just want to be true to myself. So I think what I've done since I did those initial stories is I've just concentrated on my own comic and my own things.
Right.
I've just kind of been building those up and getting to a stage where I can just sort of quite comfortably kind of living from my own comics. And then that means that if I do it, I'm lucky enough in the future to do anything for those companies. I can sort of say yes or no to them, and I can sort of say, look, I'll do this, but I'm not interested in doing that because that's just not to me a good comic. So and I think the reason why you see a lot of very underwhelming comics put out by those big companies is because everyone's just kind of like earning a living and kind of just trying to do the best they can in the circumstances they've got. And you get some absolutely brilliant comics sometimes from some brilliant writers and artists.
Hmm.
And those are guys that have the kind of clout to sort of say, look, I'm doing it like this, and if you don't like it, then I'll go and do something else. And they go, okay, great, because they want to work with that guy because they're so sort of talented and successful. They can have that kind of situation. So
Right.
yeah, and I mean, I'm just a like independent comic creator who got very lucky to write any stories for those companies in the first place. So I don't have any kind of clout at this stage of my career. So I'm just trying to like build up my own comics to give me a bit more independence going forward.
Well, I'd say you have more than you think, man. And your books it's a really awesome read. They look fantastic, by the way, as well. Props to your artist on all that. It's just, man, it's fun to think though nowadays. I feel like more and more people start independently, and it
Yeah,
feels like it's a bit easier now than it used to be to try to get a book out, get images out, get buzz going for your stuff.
yeah.
Whereas,
It is. It's much easier to make a comic, and there's ways you can make the comics, get comics funded and stuff that you never used to be able to do in the past, which is fantastic. But the flip side of that is if you're new to this and you're starting, there's just so many people making comics now. It's actually harder to get noticed. When I made Death Sentence, which is 10 years ago now, the fact that I'd made a comic that was good and looked professional, it was like pretty amazing. And if I showed it to anybody, they were like, "Oh wow, let's have a look at this." So I would just sort of wave it under the nose of like an editor at a big company, and they go like, "Wow, that looks great. Yeah, let's do this." And I don't think that happens now because I think there's just so many independent comics that look really professional that I don't think there's that same interest from editors and big companies about just reading them because they're just like, well, yeah, you're one of thousands that are
you're
doing it.
just another
So it's
stone in the river, man.
yeah, so it's the flip side to it. It's like it's easier to make a comic and to make your own comic when it's editing, but it's also I think harder probably to get noticed in that through that route than it used to
Right. Yeah. And
be.
I guess I feel that in a way. I used to be in a band, and it was kind of the same thing. Like, I think when I was younger watching bands, you would see these guys and girls and you would think, "Wow, they're doing something special." And
Yeah,
then when I was doing it, man, it was probably around 2010, 2012. It felt like we were just a group of kids like every other group of kids that was doing the exact same thing, but it was so easy to find studios to record in. It was so easy to put your music on websites to get out there. It was so easy to burn a CD. It seemed like why
yeah,
wasn't everyone doing it, you know?
yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting time that we live in because yeah. But the other thing as well is like you can actually make more money making your own comic than you can make doing a comic for Marvel or DC.
Oh yeah, by
Because
far.
yeah, they pay. a certain rate and they pay a certain royalty. And if you're an artist, you can also make money selling your original pages or
Mm-hmm.
your original cover art, which is very lucrative. So there are people making really good money, doing stuff for Marvel and DC. But there's some mega money from not me, but some people that are making their own comics. They're just making insane amounts of money every time they sort of publish something.
Like, I
Um,
have heard other people make tons of money.
yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
it's open to anyone. Anyone theoretically could make a comic, bring it out, and make a huge amount of money. There's no barrier. It's just like it's not a meritocracy. It's not based on what is the best comic. It's just it's like lightning in a bottle a little bit. What catches the imagination of the public at a particular time.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're making your own comics, the fact that like a numpty like me can make money doing out my own independent comic and like Jack Kirby never could, I mean, that's crazy, right? That's just nuts. But that's just the luck of the times that we live in. Jack never got the opportunities to make and publish his own comics uh,
Yeah.
in a way that was financially viable to support his family.
Right.
Now, I almost feel it would be like obscene to like not grasp this opportunity to like build my own universe and to make my own comic world when I've been lucky enough to live in a time where it's profitable. And I've got one thing that's the talent of someone like Jack Kirby, but I've got a comic that is profitable and goes out, to 60 countries around the world and, is like very well reviewed and stuff. And that's just a lot of luck about, the times that I live in. So I
Mhm.
feel like it's almost obscene not to grasp that opportunity and to just make the most of it.
Right. And I mean, you kind of touched on it, but how is it, a lot of people when they write or, they're making books, it seems like a very singular or linear story, but you have, it seems like you're building an entire universe with your book. How, like, what is it like trying to craft something more than just a single character story?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Something I hit on straight away in order to make the very first issue was that the comic was a lot more interesting if you had like three narratives and you sort of interwove them in a really interesting way. And you have these like juxtapositions between, the ending of one scene and the start of another scene and nice segues and you're kind of contrasting and undercutting sometimes or making amusing comparisons between the three sort of characters in the three different narratives. And three just seems to be a really good number for that. It just seems to work really well. And throughout this whole the three books, I kind of use that technique, and it works really well. It's partly why the book is kind of reviewed well because you can just do a lot with it. You can say a lot more. You can be a lot more. You can get a lot more depth to it. It's really dramatically exciting because there's always something going on that's really building and bubbling and then exploding, and one narrative thread will affect another one and spin that off into something even more exciting. And that's really just all about good storytelling. And I've always primarily been a writer, so I've always come at it from a long period of like studying writing as a craft and how to tell stories and writing in other mediums like screenplays and things. So that was like a big part of the initial comic because in the first comic I was the writer, um, but I was also, prior to doing the comic, I was designing characters for computer games because I'm also an artist. So I would paint and design, characters for various different computer games. And
Yeah.
um, so I designed the characters for my comic, and I am designing the concept art for them. That also gave me the covers. So a lot of the covers of the initial run of the comic, so basically my concept paintings for the characters.
Hmm.
And that also makes it easier to make a comic because it's like I've got characters, I've got cool characters, I've got a great story, and I've got covers that look great. So I'm already in a good position to sort of start making a comic. And then I needed a really fantastic like sequential artist who was like way better than I was at doing that. and I was very lucky that I found Mike Dowling, who's currently doing stuff for Spider-Man, and he's been doing like Bry-Fy and things like that. Just an incredibly talented guy, and like way better at doing comics than I am. And he drew the first book and did an amazing job of it. It was an absolutely fantastic, bit of sequential art. Basically, just blows me away. And then he went on and from that book, you're doing so well and doing so well, he got lots of other good. And then I picked up with Martin Simmons, who was the artist in the second and third book. And obviously Martin Simmons has since gone on the back of the second bestseller's book. He got a lot of work, and he's gone on to do Department of Truth, which is a really big, book with him. So he again, took the very different artist to Mike, but just took the art to a different kind of place and different level. And there's things that Mike does that Martin doesn't do, and things that Martin does that Mike doesn't do, and it just really brings out different qualities of the story with each artist. And then by the time we got to the middle of the third book, which is when Martin left to do his own stuff, I was looking around, and it's very hard to find artists that are as good as Mike and Martin, to work on an independent book that don't want to do a bigger project. So at that point, I got a lot better at drawing comics rather than just doing like character designs and things and concept art. So I thought, well, in all honesty, like the best person to finish this comic off and to do the character justice and to get the kind of action the way we want it and keep the standards of the comic up was for me to do it. So the last 3 issues and the next book, I've been doing that myself, and that again brings out like a whole nother layer of like narrative possibilities. Because if you're, as you've seen with many writers and artists throughout the ages, when you write and draw your own stuff, you can just be a lot more kind of sophisticated and clever with it, and
Yeah.
you can find things on the page and do things on the page and change the layering and just tell something in an image rather than a word, the words that you're going to write and stuff, and you can just have a lot more fluid kind of storytelling. So that again has taken it to like another place, which I'm really excited about, because the next book, this current book that we just did the last Kickstarter for, was book 3, and that kind of wrapped up that narrative. But the next definitely book is kind of like building on what I've been able to learn doing both things myself and just taking it to another level entirely, another place entirely, which is going to be quite exciting for the
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
No, that sounds so exciting, man. And I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you got to go soon, but I do want to ask you one last question. And before we start to say our goodbyes, but when you're writing, these characters and you get so involved in their own stories, from a writer's perspective, do you ever just get to a moment where you're so frustrated because this is how this character is going to behave in your mind? Like,
Yeah.
like you as a person are like, no, this is not how I would do it, but you're like, man, that's just so Kevin.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's very true. Yeah, definitely. I think there's a point you're trying to bring the character to life, and at the start you're just kind of groping around trying to find a personality. And I often find like I say, I draw the characters first and designing the visual look of the characters. And I always, when I was a designer of characters, I always try and tell the story of the character's life through like their tattoos or through like the little bracelets or rings they wear or little scars they've got or certain items of clothing they wear or something. And you try and sort of tell the character's personality and life story in a way that's affecting their appearance and makes them feel very kind of credible and alive. So, and when I'm concept designing the characters, I start to hear them talk, and I start jotting down like little phrases that they'd say, and that gives me a sort of attitude and a sort of, and then that leads to sort of, if they said something funny, usually they say something funny or something, a little, dramatic, in some argument with somebody about something, then that leads to a scene, and I start kind of like, imagining the scene, and I write down like all the dialogue in the scene. And I just find that's a very sort of free and loose kind of process. And then by the end of the process, where I've kind of got the first kind of starting to write the first script, I've got all these sort of dialogue scenes and dialogue snippets. So I just go through it all and just like throw out all the crap, and that's really just a really big part of writing good stuff. It's just be a really ruthless editor of your own stuff and just like throw out all the crap. And there is a lot of crap. If you're any writer, no matter what they say, I mean, a lot of people try and promote themselves as these kind of like visionary geniuses or something. But to me, there's a lot of craft to it, and a lot of it is just like reading it back in a really sort of detached way and just saying, like, that's, that's not good, that's not good, that's not good, that's bad, that's kind of irrelevant. And then you finally hit a scene or a moment and you think like, wow, that is fucking awesome. That's really funny. You forgot you wrote it and it makes you laugh or something.
Right.
And then that's the bit you use, and that's the bit you put in the comic, and you build a scene around that, and that's how you get these like really good kind of funny or dramatic scenes and really good characters, because you're just sort of like generating a lot of material and then just picking out the golden nuggets and putting that in the comic. So that's a good way of working. Because if you're making comics, you're basically doing it every day, pretty much 7 days a week, for most of the year. So there's a lot of work to it, and there's a lot of like any job is just like a lot of stages and a lot of getting stuff down and a lot of going through processes. But you've got to have the inspiration, you've got to have the magic.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's important to have these kind of like loose freestyle kind of like jams with art and with writing, and then to just sort of let things flow and not really analyze it, and just sort of like almost like stream of consciousness, and then just go back to it later and edit it, and just another tip that I do, which is very useful, is I write a scene, and I'm just trying to. I always the way I plot things is I always know what needs to happen in each scene in order to get to final endpoint of the book. Because I always know how each story's going to end, and I know how it starts. So then it's like, well, how do I get from just that to the end, and plot out all these little steps that you need to go through and things that need to happen in order to get there to make it exciting. You write those down on little kind of cards, and then you've got like a little description of what needs to happen in that scene. So when you are doing that, you basically just have to kind of write the character, getting from point A to point B at the end of the scene. Now, if the character's situation hasn't changed by the end of the scene, it isn't a scene. And I see that in a lot of poor quality comics and badly written stuff. It's like there's a lot of scenes that aren't scenes because nothing's actually happened in the scene. It's just like some guys talking or something has occurred. But there's nothing. There's no sort of dramatic moving forward of the story by the end of the scene. So that is not a proper scene. A proper scene always moves the story forward in some way, whether it's kind of emotional, whether it's character, whether it's actual kind of physical action or whatever. So so you always trying to do that with each scene that you write. And what I always find when I go back and I read these scenes is like the first kind of like 10% of the scene and the last sort of 10% of the scene is usually like superfluous. And like if you just sort of like read through your stuff and then you start the scene at a really dramatic kind of moment, kind of like about sort of maybe sort of 10 to 25% into what you've written, that's a much better place to start a scene because it's always a lot more kind of dramatic. And people, and then it feels like you're just kind of intruded on a real moment between characters. You know what I mean? Like you sort of like you see people arguing in a coffee shop or something, and you sort of come in and halfway through the argument, but you know instantly what's going on. You can tell from the body language, you can tell from their attitude, you can tell what they're saying to each other. You infer a lot all the time from what you're looking at. And I find a lot of comics don't make you do that. They're just very sort of surface and they're just spell everything out to you. So coming into a scene like that a little bit later always makes it a little more interesting. and then also just as soon as you hit the point where like that's the change you're looking for in the scene, then you just end the scene. You find a nice exit, whether it's a segue or it's like juxtaposition or it's like a line where you end the scene and then you into the next scene. So, and that's really good for kind of covering along nicely.
Nice, man. Well, Mr. Monty, man, I don't want to take any more of your time.
Yeah,
But
I'd love to chat more because it's been great, but I've got to go and pick up my daughter, so I'm sorry I
yeah,
can't keep
definitely.
on.
But before we go, can you let people know where they can find you, follow you on social media?
Absolutely, yeah. Monty Nero, Montynero. So that's on Facebook and it's on Twitter and it's on Appleclick and I've got stuff on there. So yeah, you can find me there. I'd love to meet new people and anyone that wants to read a great comic. Yeah, hit me up.
Yeah, awesome stuff, man. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It was such a great time.
Thank you for having me. It's been awesome.